Women in the Bible tend to get a bad reputation, whether it's because of the nature of their story or the way that the writers of the Bible write their story, or because of the way that interpreters interpret their story. We frequently hear things about the women in these stories that may not be true and definitely doesn't put them in the best light. This way of seeing women in the Bible starts right from that very first woman. For Eve eats of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and bears the weight of this responsibility. Although it's certainly clear that Adam is with her the entire time and eats of the fruit himself. But for centuries, people have placed all the blame for this disobedience to God on Eve. This continues throughout the Bible, interpreting what happens to women and what women do in the worst possible light. Many of the women in the Bible aren't even named, and so we have to call them by what they do or what they say. And so we get people like the woman caught in adultery or the woman at the well. When we interpret this story, frequently, and especially in the past few decades, people have looked at the story and heard this part where Jesus says, "You have had 5 husbands." They've heard it with judgment and anger and condemnation. For many years, people have interpreted this story as meaning that this woman was a prostitute or an adulteress or maybe something even worse than that. And yet, nowhere in the text does it say that. Nowhere does Jesus condemn her for her life choices. Nowhere does the writer of the Gospel of John explain that this is what having 5 husbands means. In other places, Jesus does condemn people for their choices. But here, it's far more likely that this woman has fallen victim to things that happened to women in the past and still happen to women today. It's far more likely that she was abused, or abandoned, or widowed, or barren. And because she could not give sons to her husbands, was cast aside. There's no reason to interpret this story in the way that it has been for decades. And no matter how we interpret it, when we focus so much on this one line that talks about this woman's husbands, we miss the whole point of her story. And we miss how amazing this woman truly is. You see, this woman is strong. She is powerful. She is unafraid. She is unafraid to speak to Jesus, to question him, to challenge him even for what he says, for what he does, and for what his people, the Jews, have been doing and saying for years. This woman does not back down from the things in life that are tough. She does not turn away from the messy story that is her life, but she engages in conversation with Messiah. Right from the beginning of the story, the woman acknowledges just how much divides her from Jesus. There's the obvious division of gender and all that that meant in this time. But there's also the ethnic division between Jews and Samaritans, who we are told do not hold things in common. Unless, of course, you consider the fact that they hold common ancestry. For our ancestor Jacob dug this well. Then, of course, there's the division by religion. For Jesus is a rabbi, a teacher, one who is well versed in the laws and the scripture. And this woman is not a teacher or a religious scholar. And yet, despite all that, she is unafraid. When Jesus asks her to give him some water, she says, "Why? Why would you ask that of me when you know how our different ethnicities interact?" In fact, she might even be asking, "Why are you even here?" Because the Jews would frequently walk around Samaria to avoid interaction with the Samaritans. She's not afraid to ask why. And then when Jesus says, if you knew who I was, you would ask me for water, she's not afraid to ask the obvious question. How could you give me water if you don't have anything to reach into the well and get the water out? And then when Jesus begins to talk about living water, water that quenches thirst for a lifetime, this woman asks, maybe even demands, that he give her the water so that she doesn't have to keep lugging her jar out day after day and filling it up and lugging it back. And when she starts to realize that this conversation is about more than her physical needs, she begins to show just how much she knows. She asks Jesus, why is it that your people say that our place of worship isn't good enough? What is it about you Jews that makes you better than us? She calls Jesus a prophet. She recognizes the signs that he is a prophet, one who speaks for God. And she also knows what the Messiah will be like. She knows that the Messiah will come and the Messiah will rescue the people. And she says so to Jesus. And when she does this, Jesus turns and says, I am he. I am the Messiah. This woman was unafraid to confront Jesus, to converse with him no matter the things that divided them. And because of that, she is the first person in the Gospel of John who hears Jesus say, I am. The Greek is ego eimi. It simply means I am. But Jesus says I am many times in the Gospel of John, and it's very important. You probably know some of these I am sayings. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way and the truth and the life. I am the good shepherd. But this is the first time that Jesus says, I am. I am he. I am the Messiah. And every time Jesus says I am throughout the Gospel of John, he is connecting himself with the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. The God who speaks to Moses out of the burning bush. And when Moses says, what should I call you? God says, I am. The Hebrew can be translated I am as the simplest form, but it could also mean I am who I am, or I will be what I will be, or I am now what I have always been and will be for all time. This woman, who obviously knows her scriptures, knows the story of God through her people, will know what Jesus is doing when he says, I am. And so she leaves her jar behind, and she runs back to her city. And again, she is not afraid. She is not afraid to stand in the streets and proclaim the good news to people who likely have been shunning her or treating her in not very nice ways because of her messy history, because of her real life. She's not afraid. And she turns to them and she says, come and see. Come and see a man who has told me everything I have ever done. Could he be the Messiah? And simply because of her testimony, the people begin to believe. They go to Jesus. They invite him to stay, and he stays with them for 2 days, which is a rare occurrence. And at the end of the story, they go back to the woman, and they say, it's no longer because of what you told us that we believe, but because we have seen. We know that this man is truly the Savior of the world. I wonder what the church would look like without women like this woman at the well. What would the church look like if she had not gone back to her village and told the people, come and see? For when Jesus speaks to her and says, "I am," Jesus is sharing the good news with Samaritans. For the good news is not just for the Jews, but for all people. And what would have happened if this woman never told anyone? What are we missing? And what are the people around us missing? Because we're afraid. What are we missing out on because we're afraid to ask questions, to challenge others, and maybe even God? What are people missing because we are afraid? Afraid to be like the woman, to be evangelists, good news tellers. What are people missing? Because we're so worried about making ourselves, our message, our lives perfect before we go and tell. What would change if we could be courageous like this woman? If we could go out and tell the people we know, whether they like us or not, come and see. Come and see the one who has seen and knows everything I have ever done, and yet loves me. Come and see the one who knows everything you have ever done, and loves you. Come and see the one who came for the sake of the whole world, who lives and dies and rises again and invites us into that same life, who invites us into relationship, into conversation, and sends us out. Come and see what I have seen. Come and see. Amen.